The stagecoach door swung open with a groan of tormented wood, releasing Eleanor McKenna into the blistering fist of a Wyoming afternoon. She took one step, her boots sinking into dust as fine as cinnamon, and the world exploded. A gunshot cracked the air sharp and absolute, followed by a chorus of screams. Glass shattered from the bank across the street, a crystalline cascade in the punishing sunlight. Men in dusty bandanas spilled from its doors, shotguns barking orders that were swallowed by the rising panic. Eleanor froze, her travel-worn navy dress suddenly feeling as heavy as armor and as useless as paper. Her carefully constructed composure, the fragile shield she had maintained for 2,000 miles, disintegrated. Her stagecoach, just moments before a symbol of arrival and new beginnings, became a wall to press herself against. People scattered like quail, a panicked surge of bodies that shoved her sideways. A rough hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around. A man, his face obscured by a sweat-stained bandana and the feral glint in his eyes, snarled at her. "You'll do. A fine shield." He yanked her forward, her bonnet tumbling to the ground, and a torrent of copper hair pinned with such care that morning came loose. It caught the high sun, blazing like a signal fire. In the violent shove, Eleanor's hand flew to her throat, to the small, comforting weight of her mother's cameo brooch. Her fingers met only fabric. She looked down in horror. The clasp, a delicate gold filigree, had been torn away in the struggle. The brooch, the last tangible piece of her mother, of the life she'd left behind, was gone. A guttural cry escaped her lips, lost in the cacophony. The outlaw dragged her toward the center of the street, a human shield against the few brave townsmen attempting to return fire from behind water troughs and stacked barrels. "Hold your fire," the outlaw bellowed, his arm a vice around Eleanor's throat. "Or the redhead gets it." Through a blur of terror and dust, Eleanor saw another figure move with a purpose that defied the surrounding chaos. He emerged not from a saloon or a storefront, but from the cavernous darkness of the blacksmith shop at the end of the street. He was a mountain of a man, wide-shouldered and solid, his rolled-up sleeves revealing forearms corded with muscle and dusted with soot. He wasn't carrying a gun. In his hand, he held a heavy ball-peen hammer, gripped with the casual familiarity of a craftsman. He didn't run. He moved with a steady ground-eating stride, using the panic as his cover. The outlaw holding Eleanor was focused on the men with guns, not the blacksmith who seemed to be just another fleeing citizen. As they passed a horse trough, the blacksmith moved. He swung the hammer, not as a weapon of brute force, but with the precision of his trade. A short, sharp arc, and the flat of the hammerhead connected with the outlaw's wrist. A sickening crack, a shriek of pain, and the shotgun clattered to the dust. The outlaw's grip on Eleanor loosened, and in that instant, the blacksmith's other hand shot out, grabbing the man's collar and slamming him against the trough with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. The other outlaws, seeing their leader's capture and the tide turning, fired one last volley into the air and scrambled for their horses. The crisis, as sudden as a summer storm, was over. Eleanor stumbled back, her breath coming in ragged sobs, her eyes scanning the ground for the impossible-to-find gleam of gold. The blacksmith secured the subdued outlaw's hands with a length of rope he produced from a pocket, his movements economical and sure. Only then did he turn to Eleanor. His face was weathered, his hair dark as coal, but his eyes were the color of warm honey, and they held not the manic energy of the fight, but a surprising calm. "Are you all right, miss?" His voice was deep, a low rumble that seemed to anchor the world back onto its axis. Eleanor could only knot her throat too tight for words. Her gaze was still fixed on the churned-up dust where she'd lost the cameo. It was hopeless, a tiny heirloom in a street of chaos. He saw the direction of her frantic gaze. He saw the raw despair in her eyes that was deeper than the terror of being held hostage. You lost something, he stated, not a question. Before she could answer, another man pushed through the gathering crowd. He was immaculate in a black suit, his thin mustache waxed to sharp points, his face a mask of cold fury. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes locking onto Eleanor's disheveled form, her wild hair, her tear-streaked, dusty face. This was Wilfred Hargrave, the man whose letters had promised a new life. Miss McKenna, he asked the name, a condemnation. He took in the entire scene, the captured outlaw, the still-smoking guns, Eleanor at the center of the violent spectacle. His gaze fell upon her hair, a chaotic banner of copper fire against the grime on her cheek. A look of profound disgust twisted his features. So it's true. Mr. Hargrave, Eleanor began trying to summon some remnant of the poised, respectable woman she was supposed to be. I should have known, he cut her off, his voice rising, carrying to the onlookers who were now shifting their attention from the outlaws to this new drama. Such an arrival. An omen. Blood and chaos follow your kind. He gestured vaguely at the mayhem. You bring this trouble with you. It's the mark you bear. He spat the words, pointing a trembling finger at her hair. The devil's own color. A harbinger of misfortune. The crowd murmured. Eleanor felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, their initial sympathy curdling into suspicion. The terror of the robbery was replaced by the cold, familiar dread of judgment. I will not have it. Hargrave declared, his voice ringing with self-righteous authority. I will not have my name, my business, my home tainted by such an ill-favored creature. Our arrangement is terminated. You are no bride of mine. He turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the center of the street, the dust of her shattered future settling around her. The robbery had taken her mother's cameo. Wilfred Hargrave had just taken everything else. The blacksmith, Daniel Ryder, watched Hargrave's retreat, a flicker of contempt in his honey-colored eyes. Then he looked back at Eleanor, at her ramrod-straight posture, her lifted chin, the single tear tracing a clean path through the dust on her cheek. He saw not a curse, but a survivor. And as the crowd began to disperse, his gaze fell upon a small, intricate object, half buried in the dust near the horse trough, its gold winking in the unforgiving sun. He bent down, his large fingers surprisingly gentle, as he picked it up. The Frontier Hotel smelled of boiled coffee, old wood, and quiet desperation. Eleanor sat at a small table in the corner of the dining room, a plate of congealing eggs before her untouched. Outside, the morning was bright and crisp, a mockery of the storm that had broken over her life the day before. After Hargrave's public denunciation, it had been the blacksmith Daniel Ryder who had silently retrieved her trunk from the stagecoach and carried it into the hotel. He had spoken only a few words to the proprietor, a stern-faced woman in widow's black, named Mrs. Patterson, before nodding to Eleanor and disappearing back into the comforting clangor of his shop. Mrs. Patterson had surveyed Eleanor with an unnervingly shrewd gaze. Hargrave's a fool, but he owns half this town. She'd stated, her voice as crisp as starched linen. A room is $2 a week, meals included. You have funds. Eleanor had admitted to her $17, the number feeling both impossibly small and tragically large, the sum total of a life dismantled and sold off. Mrs. Patterson's expression had softened by a fraction. That'll buy you 8 days. After that, you're on your own. Now, on the first of those 8 days, Eleanor felt the full weight of her predicament. She was a pariah. The whispers had followed her from the moment she'd entered the dining room. The redhead. Hargrave's bad omen. Caused that whole robbery, they say. Superstition was a virulent weed in the soil of the frontier, and her hair was its perfect nourishment. She pushed the eggs away and sipped her coffee. She had her skills bookkeeping a fine hand for sewing a classical education that was all but useless here. But who in Willow Creek would hire the woman publicly branded a curse by the town's most powerful merchant? The dining room door opened, admitting Daniel Ryder. He filled the doorway, his presence seeming to suck the air from the room. The whispers died. Men who had been sneering in her direction a moment before now offered respectful nods. He'd cleaned up, but the scent of coal smoke and hot metal clung to him like a second skin. His eyes scanned the room and found her in the corner. He crossed to her table, his footsteps heavy and sure on the worn floorboards. "Miss McKenna." "Mr. Ryder," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you again for your assistance yesterday." Any decent man would have done the same. He gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "May I?" She nodded, and the chair groaned in protest as he sat. He looked at her uneaten breakfast. "Hotel food's not that bad. My appetite has deserted me. Can't say I blame you." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze direct. "I came to offer more than sympathies." He reached into his pocket and placed a small cloth-wrapped object on the table. "I believe this is yours." Eleanor's breath caught. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped the cloth. Lying in the center was her mother's cameo. The delicate ivory profile was unharmed, but the golden frame was bent, and the clasp was mangled beyond repair. A sob of pure relief escaped her. I thought it was lost forever." "Found it near the trough after the commotion died down," he said. "The clasp is broken, but the pin is sound. I can forge a new one, make it stronger than the original." She looked up at him. This quiet stranger who had saved her from an outlaw defended her with his silence, and now returned the most precious thing she owned. I don't know how I can repay you." "I'm not looking for repayment." His eyes, the color of sage honey, held hers. "I'm looking for help. I overheard you telling Mrs. Patterson you had $17 and 8 days. That's not much of a start." Eleanor's pride bristled. "I am quite resourceful, Mr. Ryder." "I have no doubt," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "But even the most resourceful person needs an opportunity. My shop, it does good business. Every horse, every wagon, every plow in this valley needs my attention at some point. But my books," he sighed, "my books are a disaster. 6 months of receipts and invoices stuffed in a crate. I'm a blacksmith, not a clerk. I'm good with my hands, but figures give me a headache." Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered in Eleanor's chest. "Are you offering me a position?" "I am," he confirmed. "It wouldn't be much to start. Room and board at the hotel, plus a little extra. Honest work. It would give you time. Time to decide what you really want to do. Time for the town to see you for who you are, not for what Hargrave claims you are." Why? The question was blunt, born of a life that had taught her to be suspicious of kindness without cause. Why would you do this? You'd be placing yourself in direct opposition to Mr. Hargrave. Daniel leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Let's just say I've got no love for bullies. And I don't hold with judging a person by the color of their hair or the circumstances of their arrival. I judge a person by their work and their character." He leaned forward again, his voice dropping slightly. "Hargrave warned you to leave. Working for me would be a clear statement that you're staying. Are you prepared for that?" Eleanor looked from the determined set of his jaw to the broken cameo on the table. One represented a fight, the other a past she refused to lose. Forging a new clasp, forging a new life. The symbolism was not lost on her. "When can I start?" A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his weathered features. "As soon as you've had a proper breakfast." He signaled the waitress. "Martha, bring Miss McKenna some fresh eggs and bacon, and some of your cornbread. The good stuff." He turned back to Eleanor. "Hargrave won't like this." "Mr. Hargrave," Eleanor said, her voice infused with a strength that had been absent just moments before, "has already made his opinion of me quite clear. I find I'm no longer concerned with his approval." The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but for the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, Eleanor felt the ground solidifying beneath her feet. It wasn't the ground she had expected, but it was a place to stand. The Ryder blacksmith and farrier was organized chaos. It was a cathedral of iron and fire, smelling of coal sweat and the clean, sharp scent of cooling metal. Tools of every shape and size hung in their designated places on the walls, a testament to a mind that craved order in its craft, if not in its paperwork. Daniel worked at the forge, his hammer falling in a steady rhythmic beat that was the town's heartbeat. The office was a small, dusty room at the back, and it was every bit the disaster Daniel had described. A large shipping crate overflowed with a jumble of papers, receipts scrawled on scraps of butcher paper, invoices from suppliers in Cheyenne. Letters from ranchers, all mixed with bits of leather, stray nails, and a fine layer of soot. "I warned you," Daniel said from the doorway, a sheepish look on his face. Eleanor, however, felt a sense of calm settle over her. This was a language she understood. This was chaos she could tame. "I'll need a ledger, ink pens, and a great deal of quiet," she said, rolling up her sleeves. For the next week, she immersed herself in Daniel Ryder's business. As she sorted, filed, and recorded, a picture of the man emerged. He was skilled, reliable, and fair. But he was also too generous, often accepting IOUs from struggling families or bartering his services for goods he didn't need. More troubling, however, was a pattern she uncovered in the records of the town's more prominent citizens. She found a recurring name, Hargrave Mercantile. Daniel bought most of his raw iron and coal from Wilfred Hargrave at prices that seemed unusually high. Furthermore, several ranchers and small business owners who owed Daniel money had notations scribbled next to their names. "Loan with Hargrave." "Daniel," she called out one afternoon, stepping out of the office into the heat of the forge. He looked up from the wagon wheel he was repairing, sweat gleaming on his brow. "This loan you have with Mr. Hargrave for the new bellows," she began, holding up the paperwork. "The interest rate is nearly criminal." Daniel wiped his face with a rag. "It's the only loan I could get. The bank wouldn't approve it without a co-signer." Hargrave offered. "He didn't offer," Eleanor corrected gently. "He ensnared. Look at these." She spread several other invoices on a clear workbench. "Tom Martinez, the Morrisons, the Clearwater Ranch. They all have outstanding debts with you, and they all have high-interest loans with Hargrave. He's using their debt to him to control their ability to pay their debts to you and others. He's squeezing this town, Daniel, and using you as one of his pressure points." Daniel straightened his expression, hardening as he looked at the papers. "I knew he was a bastard, but I didn't realize it was this systematic." "He is strangling Willow Creek's prosperity to feed his own," Eleanor said. "And what's worse, he is using his influence to spread rumors about you." "What rumors?" Daniel's voice was low. "That you're a man with no past, a drifter, unreliable. It's why some of the newer ranchers have taken their business to the smithy in Rock Springs, even though it's a day's ride." The hammer in Daniel's hand landed on the anvil with a deafening clang. For a moment, a dangerous fire lit his eyes. Then it subsided, replaced by a weary resolve. "What do you suggest we do?" "We fight back," Eleanor said, her own resolve hardening. "Not with anger, but with organization. We call a meeting of the merchants and ranchers he's targeting. We show them this pattern. We form a cooperative, buy our supplies in bulk from Cheyenne, bypassing Hargrave entirely. We create our own credit union, lending to each other at fair rates." Daniel stared at her, a slow, admiring smile spreading across his face. A Boston bookkeeper with the heart of a revolutionary. Hargrave has no idea who he's dealing with. Neither do you, Mr. Ryder, Eleanor replied, a hint of a smile playing on her own lips. The meeting took place secretly in the back room of the hotel with Mrs. Patterson standing guard. At first the men were skeptical, fearful of Hargrave's retribution. But as Eleanor laid out the ledgers showing them in stark black and white how Hargrave was manipulating their finances, fear turned to anger. "She's right," Tom Martinez, a grizzled rancher with a reputation for straight talking, declared. "He's got me paying twice what I should for feed, and he holds the note on my land. I've been one bad winter away from losing everything." By the end of the night, the Willow Creek Merchants Cooperative was born. Daniel and Tom were elected as its heads, and Eleanor, to her surprise, was unanimously voted treasurer and record keeper. They had taken the first step in breaking Hargrave's hold. Hargrave's retaliation was swift and subtle. A shipment of iron bound for Daniel from Cheyenne was mysteriously lost on the trail. Whispers about Daniel's past intensified now with darker undertones. Heard he left a town back east in a hurry. There was trouble, some say. Hargrave never said a word himself, but his influence was a poison that seeped into the town's well of gossip. He would stop by the smithy ostensibly on business, his eyes lingering on Eleanor. "A woman of your education must find this environment terribly coarse," he remarked one afternoon, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Tied to a man with no family, no history. A dangerous gamble. It would be a pity if you were to find yourself entangled in matters you don't understand." It was a veiled threat, and they both knew it. As he left, Eleanor noticed him pause by the telegraph office. An unnatural interest, a calculating look in his eyes that sent a shiver down her spine. The pieces were moving on a board she couldn't fully see, but she knew Hargrave was planning a checkmate. The bond between Eleanor and Daniel was forged in the heat of their shared struggle. Late nights were spent poring over cooperative ledgers, their heads bent close together under the light of a single lantern. They shared meals in the quiet of the shop, after the day's work was done, talking about their pasts. Eleanor of her quiet book-filled life in Boston. Daniel of a life on the Kansas prairie he spoke of only in vague, pain-laced terms. He showed her the delicate iron roses he crafted in his rare spare moments, a surprising artistry from a man whose hands were so calloused and strong. He was teaching her about the different qualities of metal, the way it bent to a skilled hand, and the way it could be made stronger by fire. She, in turn, was teaching him the language of commerce, of assets and liabilities, of building an enterprise that was as strong as his ironwork. One evening, while searching for an old invoice, Eleanor's hand brushed against a small, locked wooden box at the bottom of a crate. "What's this?" Daniel, who had been sketching a design for a new type of plow, looked up. A shadow passed over his face. "Just some old things. Nothing important." His evasiveness piqued her curiosity. Later that week, when he was out on a call at the Clearwater Ranch, she found the box again. The lock was simple, and a piece of wire from the shop opened it with little effort. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, were a woman's wedding band, a lock of blonde hair tied with a blue ribbon, and a single yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local farmer found slain. Neighbor sought for questioning." The article, dated 7 years prior from Lawrence, Kansas, detailed the murder of a man named Marcus Webb. The final paragraph noted that Webb's neighbor, Daniel Ryder, who had recently lost his wife and child to cholera and had publicly argued with Webb, had disappeared the night of the murder. The air rushed from Eleanor's lungs. This was the trouble the rumors hinted at. This was the ghost that haunted his quiet moments. Not just grief, but the shadow of an accusation, a suspicion. He had run. When Daniel returned, he found her sitting in the dim office, the contents of the box laid out on the desk. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, his face a mask of old pain and resignation. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor's voice was a whisper. "How could I?" he said, his voice rough. "How do you tell the one good thing in your life, that you might be a monster, that the world thinks you're a murderer?" "Do you think you're a monster?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "No," he said, the word heavy with 7 years of silent conviction. "I didn't kill him. Webb sold me tainted water that killed my wife and daughter. I went to his farm that night to make him confess. But he was already dead. I found him, and I knew. I knew no one would believe me. So I ran." "I believe you," she said without hesitation. The certainty of it surprised them both. She rose and crossed the space between them, taking his large, trembling hands in hers. "We will face this too, whatever this is." But Wilfred Hargrave had already decided their future. That same afternoon, he stood in the telegraph office, a self-satisfied smile on his lips, as he handed a message to the operator. It was addressed to the U.S. Marshal's office in Cheyenne. It was an anonymous tip, but one filled with damningly specific details about a fugitive murderer from Kansas, a blacksmith hiding in plain sight in a town called Willow Creek. The arrival of Federal Marshal Crawford was as quiet and deadly as a snake in the grass. He was a tall, lean man, with pale eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He didn't ride in with bluster. He simply appeared one afternoon, his horse drinking from the trough outside the smithy. He watched Daniel work for a long time before he spoke. Daniel Ryder. Daniel looked up from the anvil, his body tensing. I'm Marshal Crawford. I have a warrant for your arrest." He produced the document, the word stark against the paper. "For the murder of Marcus Webb, 7 years ago. Lawrence, Kansas." The world stopped. The hammer fell from Daniel's hand, landing with a dull thud in the dirt. Eleanor, who had come to the door of the office, felt her blood run cold. It was happening. Hargrave's checkmate. The arrest was a public spectacle. Crawford led Daniel down the main street in cuffs. The townspeople, who had slowly been warming to Eleanor and respecting Daniel, now stared with open hostility. The old superstitions, the whispers of him being a man with a dark past, all solidified into fact in their minds. A murderer? Hargrave had been right all along. The red-haired woman had brought a killer into their midst. Eleanor stood alone, watching them lead him away. The cooperative members who had stood with them just weeks before now averted their eyes. Tom Martinez met her gaze for a moment, his own filled with confusion and doubt, before turning away. Only Sarah Morrison, the doctor's wife, came to her side. "This is Hargrave's doing." Sarah said, her voice a furious whisper. "I know," Eleanor replied, her own voice shaking. The marshal knew details only someone with a personal interest would know. But knowing it and proving it are two different things. Daniel was locked in the town's small, seldom-used jail cell. When Eleanor was finally allowed to see him, the despair in his eyes was a physical blow. "You should leave, Eleanor," he said, his voice flat, defeated. "Leave Willow Creek. There's nothing for you here now but scorn. I've brought you nothing but trouble." "I am not leaving," she said, gripping the bars of his cell. "I told you I believe you, and I meant it. I am going to prove your innocence." "How?" he asked, a bitter laugh escaping him. "The whole town has turned against us. Hargrave has won." "He has not won," Eleanor said, the fire returning to her voice, fueled by a righteous fury. "He has only started a fight he is not prepared to finish." She was no longer just a bookkeeper. She was an investigator, a defender, an advocate for the man she had come to love. Hargrave had meant to destroy Daniel, but in doing so, he had unleashed a force he had never anticipated: Eleanor McKenna's unyielding resolve. She was alone, surrounded by enemies, with nothing but her wits and a belief in one man's innocence. But for a woman who had already lost everything once, it was more than enough. Eleanor's world shrank to the size of a telegraph key and a stack of ledgers. With Daniel imprisoned, the town's hostility was a palpable force. Stones were thrown at the windows of the smithy at night. Whispers followed her down the street, sharp and venomous. Murderer's whore. The members of the cooperative, fearing both Hargrave's wrath and association with a killer, abandoned their cause. Supplies were once again purchased from Hargrave Mercantile, and the chains of debt were refastened. Her only allies were the Morrisons. Dr. Morrison ensured Daniel was treated humanely in his cell, while Sarah provided Eleanor with meals company and unwavering moral support. Tom Martinez, the grizzled rancher, also came around after a few days of wrestling with his conscience. He appeared at the smithy one evening, his hat in his hands. "I was wrong to turn my back," he said, his voice rough with shame. "A man is innocent until proven guilty. What do you need?" "Information," Eleanor said, gratitude making her voice thick. "From Lawrence, Kansas. I need to know everything about Marcus Webb's murder." With Tom's money and Sarah's social connections, Eleanor began her long-distance investigation. She sent telegrams to the sheriff's office in Lawrence, to the newspaper, to the county clerk, requesting records, witness statements, anything she could find. The replies were slow to come, and often unhelpful, the bureaucracy of law and time working against her. Hargrave's men escalated their intimidation. Her horse's saddle was cut one night. A dead snake was left on the smithy's doorstep. It was all designed to make her flee, to leave Daniel to his fate. But every act of aggression only hardened her resolve. In Daniel's ledgers, she searched for clues for any connection between him and Hargrave before her arrival. There was nothing. Their paths had never crossed. Why this obsession? Why this personal venomous hatred? The answer had to be in Kansas. A breakthrough came in the form of a telegram from a retired deputy in Lawrence, a man Tom Martinez knew through a cousin. For the price of $50, nearly all of Eleanor's remaining funds, he agreed to look into the old case file. A week later, the reply arrived. It was short, but it changed everything. A Marcus Webb case file reviewed. Victim had estranged brother in Cheyenne. Younger sibling named Wilfred Hargrave. Eleanor stared at the flimsy paper, the world tilting on its axis. It wasn't about her. It was never about her hair or the robbery or bad omens. It was a vendetta, a 7-year-old quest for revenge. Wilfred Hargrave hadn't stumbled upon the knowledge of Daniel's past. He had been hunting him. He genuinely, fervently believed that Daniel Ryder had murdered his brother. The knowledge was terrifying, but also clarifying. This wasn't the random cruelty of a prejudiced man. It was the calculated malice of a grieving one. And it meant Hargrave knew details about the murder that no one else could. He had likely been in Lawrence after it happened. He might have seen or heard something he twisted through the lens of his grief. Her investigation took on a new urgency. She sent another telegram to the retired deputy. Focus on Webb's business partners, known associates, any disputes prior to death. She was no longer just trying to prove Daniel innocent. She was trying to find the real killer. The final piece of the puzzle arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm. It was a thick envelope, delivered by stagecoach. Inside was a sworn affidavit from the retired deputy and a collection of his old notes. Marcus Webb, it turned out, had not been a simple farmer. He was involved in a lucrative and illegal cattle rustling scheme with 2 partners. In the weeks before his death, He had been arguing with them over the division of their profits. The deputy had suspected them at the time, but both men had ironclad alibis, and there was no evidence. The convenient disappearance of Daniel Ryder had closed the case. The affidavit included the names of the two partners. Eleanor sank into her chair, the papers spread before her. She had it. Proof of a motive for someone else to kill Marcus Webb. It wasn't enough to free Daniel, but it was enough to cast serious doubt on his guilt. It was enough to confront Hargrave. As the first drops of rain began to fall, she gathered the papers and marched out of the smithy. She wasn't going to the jail or the marshal's office. She was going to find Wilfred Hargrave. She found him where she expected to, at his mercantile, tallying the day's receipts, basking in his victory. But she didn't confront him there. "I have something you need to see." She said, her voice low and steady. "It concerns your brother Marcus." Hargrave's face went pale. Curiosity and hatred warred in his eyes. Curiosity won. "Where?" "The blacksmith shop," she said. "Tonight, after dark. Come alone." She knew it was a risk, meeting him on her own ground, but it was also a trap. The smithy was Daniel's space, and she would use its history, its very atmosphere, as a weapon. As she walked away, the heavens opened and the storm broke over Willow Creek. The blacksmith shop was a cavern of shadows and flickering light. The storm raged outside, a primal scream of wind and water. Rain hammered on the tin roof in a deafening torrent, and each crack of thunder shook the heavy timbers of the building. Inside, the only light came from the dying orange glow of the banked forge and the violent strobing flashes of lightning that bleached the world white for a half-second at a time. Eleanor stood beside the great anvil, the papers clutched in her hand. She had sent a coded message to Tom Martinez an hour earlier. "Storm. Tonight. Help him." It was a gamble, but she trusted the old rancher to understand. The heavy doors creaked open, admitting Wilfred Hargrave, and a swirl of wind and rain. He was soaked, his usual immaculate appearance ruined. He slammed the doors shut, plunging them into near darkness, the forge's glow painting his face in demonic shades of red and orange. "What is this melodrama, Miss McKenna?" He sneered, his voice tight with tension. "If you have something to say, say it." "I know Marcus Webb was your brother," Eleanor said, her voice ringing clear over the storm. The direct hit surprised him, stripping away his composure. "What of it?" he spat. "That animal rider murdered him. For 7 years I have searched for him, waiting for the day I could see him hang for what he did." "He didn't do it," Eleanor said. "You've been blinded by your grief, so blinded you couldn't see the truth that was right in front of you." "The truth." Hargrave laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The truth is that Ryder threatened my brother, and 2 days later, Marcus was found with his skull crushed by a blacksmith's hammer. The truth is that Ryder ran like the guilty coward he is. I sent for the marshal because I wanted justice." "You wanted revenge," Eleanor countered, stepping forward into the light of the forge. "And in your quest for it, you ignored the real killers." She held up the affidavit. "Your brother wasn't an innocent farmer, Mr. Hargrave. He was a cattle rustler, and his partners killed him in a dispute over stolen money." Lightning flashed, illuminating the rage and disbelief on Hargrave's face. "Lies, slander concocted to save your lover's neck. It's all here." Eleanor pressed, her voice rising with the wind. "The deputy's notes, the witness statements about their arguments. Your brother wasn't the man you thought he was. He was a criminal." This was the secondary twist, the blow she hoped would shatter his certainty. She was offering him a truth that would exonerate Daniel, but it would come at the cost of his brother's memory. For a moment, she saw him waver, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The honorable man he'd been avenging was a monster. The thought was too much. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No. Marcus was... he was my brother. He was a good man. He sold poisoned water to a man and watched his wife and child die. Eleanor's voice was a lash. Is that what a good man does? That was the breaking point. The venerated image of his brother shattered, and all that was left was raw, misdirected rage. With a guttural cry, Hargrave lunged at her. He wasn't trying to talk anymore. He was trying to silence her, to destroy the truth she represented. He grabbed for the papers, and Eleanor stumbled back, her heel catching on a loose floorboard. She fell hard, the air knocked from her lungs. Hargrave was on her in an instant, his hands closing around her throat. His face, illuminated by another flash of lightning, was a mask of pure madness. I'll kill you for that, he hissed. I'll see you both in hell. Eleanor clawed at his hands, her vision starting to tunnel the roar of the storm, fading to a dull hum. Just as the last of her strength gave out, the shop's side door crashed open. A figure stood silhouetted against the storm, soaked and breathing hard. It was Daniel. He moved with a speed that belied his size. He grabbed Hargrave by the collar and hauled him off Eleanor as if he were a sack of grain. Hargrave, crazed with rage, swung wildly. Daniel deflected the blow and drove a single hard punch to Hargrave's jaw. The merchant crumpled to the ground unconscious. Daniel dropped to his knees beside Eleanor, his hands gentle as he helped her sit up. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice choked with fear and relief. I'm all right, she gasped, drawing in a ragged breath. How did you... Tom, he said, gesturing to the open door where the old rancher stood, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. He broke me out when the storm hit its peak. Said your message sounded like trouble. The main doors burst open again. This time it was Marshal Crawford, flanked by 2 deputies, their lanterns cutting through the gloom. They took in the scene at a glance, Eleanor on the floor, Hargrave unconscious, Daniel kneeling over her, and Tom Martinez with a shotgun. Ryder, the marshal said, his voice grim as he drew his pistol. It's over. Wait, Eleanor cried, scrambling to her feet, the scattered papers clutched in her hand. It's not what you think. He's the one who's innocent. She shoved the affidavit into the marshal's hand. Read this, please. The truth is in here. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. By dawn, the sky was a bruised purple, washed clean by the rain. In the quiet of the marshal's office, the truth, illuminated by the steady glow of an oil lamp, finally came to light. Marshal Crawford read Eleanor's evidence slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to grim understanding. He compared the retired deputy's notes with the facts of the case, and the pieces clicked into place. By the time Hargrave awoke in a jail cell, his world had been dismantled. Presented with the evidence, his mad rage from the night before had collapsed into a hollow, broken despair. He didn't confess, but he didn't deny it either. His silence was its own admission. The assault on Miss McKenna is enough to hold him, Crawford said, looking at Eleanor with a newfound respect. And this evidence, it's enough to reopen the Webb murder investigation in Kansas. As for you, Ryder, he turned to Daniel, I'm officially releasing you. Your name is cleared. The words Daniel had waited 7 years to hear felt strangely anticlimactic. The weight didn't lift in a rush, but rather began to dissolve slowly like sugar in water. He walked out of the jail, a free man with Eleanor's hand securely in his. Word spread through Willow Creek with the morning sun. The story of Hargrave's vendetta, of his brother's criminal past, of Eleanor's investigation, and of the final violent confrontation in the smithy became instant legend. The town's mood shifted from condemnation to a deep collective shame. People who had averted their eyes now came forward. Tom Martinez was the first, clapping Daniel on the shoulder with a force that was both an apology and a promise of loyalty. The Morrisons arrived with a basket of food and an offer of any medical care needed. Mrs. Patterson showed up at the smithy and silently began sweeping her gruff way of showing support. One by one, the members of the cooperative returned their faces, etched with regret, asking to rejoin, promising to stand firm this time. Hargrave's fate was decided quickly. Facing charges for assault and the public disgrace of his family's name, he sold his mercantile and his holdings to the cooperative for a fraction of their worth. He left on the next stagecoach, a broken man, disappearing east to whatever future awaited him. Life in Willow Creek began to find a new rhythm. The cooperative, now free from Hargrave's influence, thrived under Eleanor's financial guidance. Daniel's shop was busier than ever, his work infused with a new lightness, the rhythm of his hammer, no longer a way to beat back ghosts, but a song of creation. The whispers that followed Eleanor now were not of witchcraft, but of wonder and respect. 3 months later, when the aspens in the high country had turned a brilliant, quaking gold, Daniel took Eleanor to a quiet hill overlooking the valley. The air was crisp, scented with pine and the promise of winter. Below them, Willow Creek was a patchwork of autumn color smoke curling from its chimneys in lazy spirals. They had begun framing a small house on this very hill, a testament to a future they were building with their own hands. "I have something for you," Daniel said, his voice quiet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Eleanor opened it. Lying in her palm was her mother's cameo brooch. But it was no longer broken. The golden frame was smooth and unbent. And the clasp was a new piece of artistry forged from the same gold, but shaped into 2 interlocking willow leaves, intricate and beautiful. It was stronger, more elegant, and more meaningful than the original had ever been. "I've been working on it," Daniel said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I wanted it to be perfect, stronger than before." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she traced the delicate leaves with her fingertip. He had taken the broken pieces of her past and forged them into something new, something that honored what was lost but promised a stronger future. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Eleanor McKenna," he said, taking both her hands in his. His were calloused and warm, and the hands of a man who built things, fixed things, made things whole. "You came to this town to marry another man. You faced robbery and rejection, suspicion and violence. You fought for me when no one else would. You took the chaos of my life and gave it order. You saw past the rust and the soot and found something worth saving." He knelt before her on the dry grass of their hill, his honey-colored eyes earnest and full of a love that was as solid and real as the mountains behind them. "I am not a man of fancy words," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I know this. My life began again the day you stepped off that stagecoach. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Eleanor's heart felt too big for her chest. This was not the practical, passionless arrangement she had once sought. This was a partnership forged in fire, a love built on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. This was home. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and sure as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes, Daniel, I will." He slipped the brooch from her hand and pinned it to her dress, the new clasp clicking shut with a satisfying final sound. It was a promise, kept, a circle completed. He then framed her face with his hands, his gaze tracing her features as if memorizing them for the first time. He looked at her hair, a fiery banner in the wind, and smiled. "My beautiful Eleanor," he said, "you burn brighter than the sun." He kissed her, then a kiss that held the memory of a violent afternoon and the promise of 1,000 peaceful mornings. Below them, the sound of a hammer on an anvil drifted up from the town, the steady rhythmic heartbeat of their new life.